A merry cruise on the Ant and Thurne. When Whitsuntide falls in June, it affords a rare opportunity for 3 or 4 days' cruising on the Broads, and this chapter contains the log of such a cruise on the Ant and the Thurne, which was a very merry one, because there were 3 boats in company. There was the Swallow, a 4-ton cutter, the Coyer, and the Bee, a 19-foot open centreboard cutter. The Swallow, with a crew of 2, started in the morning from Wroxham Bridge, and sailed down the River Bure and up the Ant to Ludham Bridge, which was the trysting place. The Bee, with her owner, his wife, and a friend, followed from another quarter. The Coyer was already waiting there, and the writer, with his wife and a friend, drove from Wroxham Station in the afternoon. The road follows the high ground on the edge of the marshland, and on our right hand we could see the shining curves of the river and 4 or 5 of the Broads sleeping in the sunlight. All 3 boats were lying above the bridge, the Swallow and the Bee raising their masts, which had been lowered to get through the bridge. It did not take long to get our baggage on board and to hoist sail, and we started together. The Ant is very narrow and not very deep, and the Swallow frequently touched the mud with her deep fixed keel. There was a strong wind from the west, and the Swallow and Bee took in reefs. We tore along in too close company, and when the channel twisted to the westward, and was too narrow to allow us to tack, 3 tow lines were simultaneously taken ashore, and the boats towed close on each other's heels until the river again turned northward. Away we went again, first the Bee, 20 yards after the Swallow, and 20 yards after her the Coyer. The wash we made, sweeping over the banks. Suddenly the Swallow grounded. There was no room to pass her to windward, and to leeward her 23-foot boom covered all the breadth of the channel. "Haul in your boom or there'll be a smash," cried the Coyer, coming at the rate of 6 miles an hour close behind. The main sheet was got in with great rapidity, and the Coyer just managed to slide by without doing or receiving any damage. The Swallow was soon got afloat again, and took up the chase. We passed over Irstead Shoals, and then we saw a wherry coming, her brown sail towering high in the air. She signalled us to keep to windward of her, which we were only just able to do, as the reach was a scant one. To go to leeward would mean having our mast taken out of us by her great sail and gaff. Then, after having had a sharp sail of 4 miles, we reached Barton Broad, on which magnificent sheet of water, where the wind raised respectable waves, we caught some heavy puffs while tearing up the lake, and the Coyer had to top her boom and lower her peak, while the Swallow carried away her topping lift. The chart showed a channel leading northward to 2 smaller Broads, called Stalham and Sutton Broads, and the Coyer led the way up a wide dyke. Then we came to where the dyke divided into 2. After a hurried look at the chart, we took the right-hand turn, the Bee following and almost touching us, and the Swallow in difficulties some way behind, with her sail half down. Another division of the dyke, respecting which the chart was silent, so we took the left-hand one, and found that this narrow dyke was all that remained of Stalham Broad, the rest having grown into a wilderness of reeds. We lay to at the end of the dyke near Stalham village, and prepared tea, but the Swallow came not, and though we rowed back for a mile in the jolly, we saw no sign of her. The coir was made snug for the night, with an awning over the well, and 2 hammocks slung in the little cabin, where the skipper and his wife reposed. The bees slept at an inn at Stalham, and the 2 bachelors rigged up an awning over the bee, and slept thereunder. We were disturbed many times by the eel fishers who rowed past in the night, and ceased rowing to gaze at the boats. The occupants of the Bee asserted that some of those who went past lifted up the awning and peeped at them. Before breakfast the 2 swallows came up in their jolly, and stated that they had got aground again, and thought it better to stay where they were for the night, and that being on the leeward side of the dyke, a wherry sail had grazed the top of their mast and taken the truck off. They had come in search of us the night before in their jolly, but had taken the wrong turn, which led them on to Sutton Broad, which was simply a shallow reedy lake of no particular interest. As it was Sunday, we all went dutifully to church, except one wicked man, but when we came out the rain was falling fast. We laid the 2 boats side by side, with an awning over both, and made a comfortable dinner, which actually included a trifle made by one of the ladies. It rained hard and blew hard all the day, and as the wind was straight down the narrow dyke, we had to quant the boats on to Barton Broad, which against the strong wind and the pouring rain was an uncomfortable operation, although we made merry over the difficulties. And with the 3 boats once more united, we made ourselves happy in spite of adverse circumstances. It blew and rained all day and all night with great violence, and the worst of it was that the queen bee and her husband had to row 2 miles back to Stalham to sleep. The morning broke fine, with a north west wind. We amused ourselves by photographing and gathering the silky cotton grasses with which the marsh was white, until the bees came back, about the middle of the morning, having had their drenched clothes dried in an oven. We had a rapid sail back over the Broad and down the Ant to the River Bure, where there was by comparison plenty of width and room. We sailed down the stream in close company until we came to St Benedict's Abbey, where we moored side by side to have dinner. We photographed the ruins of the Abbey in a hurry, because a bull took too great an interest in our proceedings, and then we sailed 2 miles further to the mouth of the Thurne, up which we turned. As the 3 yachts sailed up this stream almost side by side, the wash was great, and one angler, who was lying on the low bank fast asleep, was swept from heels to head by the wave, and was extremely indignant. Another angler, a clergyman, was sitting on a chair, and on hearing our warning cry, "Mind your feet," thought we meant to be impertinent, until the water convinced him that our hail was very pertinent. While the Swallow and the Bee sailed on up to Potter Heigham, the Coyer turned up Womack Dyke into a small sheet of water called Womack Broad. This once had 25 acres of water, but not many years ago a hove, or floating island, was blown up by the wind and anchored itself in a shallow spot in the middle, and so formed the nucleus of a vegetable growth, which has covered most of the surface. It is not solid enough now to bear the weight of a man, but in a few years it will be. An old man who lived on the borders of the Broad was very eloquent as to the doings of his father and himself on the fine little Broad, and he sorrowfully and graphically traced the various stages in the contraction of the water space by the vegetation. A large and picturesque old boat shed, with a high-roofed barn behind, a cluster of the most old-world kind of habitations in a tangled garden, and worn-out craft and gnarled oak timber for knees in front, formed one of the most eloquent bits for a painter to be found on the rivers, and we made repeated attempts to photograph it from the unsteady platform of a boat. While we were doing this, the old man got a ladder and climbed on to the thatched roof of the barn, against which the red-laden branches of a cherry tree drooped, and presently he brought us a quantity of the fruit, and hoped that we would send him a copy of the Picture of the Old Place to send to his daughter, who had married and gone to live a long way off. When the Coyer left this secluded and lovely spot, she sailed up with a dying wind to Potter Heigham Bridge, where the others had already arrived, and soon a sociable and lazy high tea brought the labour of the day to a close. In the evening the writer fished and caught some pike, while the others strolled about and gathered heaps of the yellow iris flowers to live up to, and generally behaved like unruly children. The bees found a hive close by the bridge, at the Waterman's Arms. The next morning we took the bee through the bridge, and all of us went on board her up the Hundred stream, over Heigham Sounds and Whiteslea on to Hickling, and in the afternoon we sailed back all three in a lump, and in the tacking up the Bure we hampered each other dreadfully, as the speed of the boats was so equal that we could not get away from each other. We stopped at the picturesque riverside inn at Horning Ferry for tea, and then the Coyer sailed on to the smaller Broad at Salhouse, where among the lilies she dropped her anchor. The other two boats sailed on up to Wroxham, and so finished a cruise which, in spite of the one wet day, was exceedingly merry and successful, and will, it is hoped, be repeated each Whitsuntide that falls in June. End of A Merry Cruise on the Ant and Thurne, from the book Norfolk Broads and Rivers by George Christopher Davies.